The office always felt different at night. During the day, it was a hive of chatter, printers spitting paper, phones ringing with endless demands. But after hours, once everyone else had gone home, the building breathed differently. The air grew still, the clicking of keyboards echoing louder than it should, and the city outside pressed in through the glass walls. Its hum steady, like a heartbeat I could almost sink my thoughts to. That night, it was just the two of us. She was sitting at her desk across the room, a figure of poise and authority framed by the amber glow of her desk lamp. My boss, my superior, the woman whose approval carried more weight than anyone else's in the office. She was older than me by more than a decade, and maybe that was part of why I watched her differently than I watched anyone else. She carried herself with a grace that only came from years of trial and triumph. Even in her silence, there was presence. I tried to keep my focus on the spreadsheet in front of me, but my eyes betrayed me. They drifted over the slope of her shoulders, the way her dark blazer curved neatly around her, the loose strand of hair that had fallen near her cheek as she bent over her work. She reached for a pen, and I noticed the delicate curve of her wrist, the faint clink of her bracelet catching against the desk. There was nothing unusual in what she did. She was simply working, as always. But the silence, the closeness, the absence of the usual office bustle, those things magnified every detail until even the way she sighed carried weight. Her perfume reached me across the room, something subtle, floral, and warm. Not loud, not obvious, just enough to remind me of her each time I breathe in. It blended with the scent of old paper and burned-out coffee, the aroma of long nights at the office, but it outlasted them. I should have been tired, but I wasn't. Instead, I felt restless, aware of every second, every tick of the wall clock that counted down the hours we had left in this small world of ours. At one point, she looked up. Our eyes met. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt longer, an eternity suspended between two desks. Her gaze was sharp, as if weighing me, testing whether I was crossing a line I shouldn't. My chest tightened, and I forced myself to look away, fingers resuming their dance on the keyboard as though I hadn't been caught. Still, something had shifted. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with awareness, with the quiet hum of a possibility neither of us had spoken aloud. And in that heavy quiet, I realized I didn't want to leave when the night ended. Not yet. The longer the night stretched, the quieter the office became, until even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder than our breaths. My screen glowed pale in front of me, full of numbers that refused to add up, but my focus had already left the spreadsheet. It kept drifting toward her. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples with the tips of her fingers. A small gesture, but it told a bigger story, of exhaustion, of endless hours, of the weight she carried every day as if it were second nature. She wasn't just my boss. She was the anchor of this entire floor, the person everyone leaned on, whether they admitted it or not. I noticed the fine lines around her eyes when she sighed, and instead of making her seem older, they made her more real, human. There was a vulnerability in her tiredness that most people would have overlooked. But alone with her in that quiet office, I couldn't. Then she spoke. Close that file. Her voice was firm, carrying that natural authority she always wore like armor. The kind of tone that, during the day, made entire rooms fall silent. But tonight, it landed differently. It wasn't sharp or cold. It was weary, like she was more concerned for me than commanding me. I blinked, caught off guard. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The sound of her words lingered in the air, echoing in my head longer than they should have. She stood, walking toward my desk. Her heels tapped softly against the floor, measured and steady. She reached out, her hand brushing against mine for the briefest second as she slid the folder from beneath my fingertips. The touch was nothing more than incidental, but it sent a ripple through me all the same. "You've done enough for tonight," she said, tucking the file under her arm. Her eyes met mine, softer now, less like a boss and more like something else. Something I couldn't quite name. I should have nodded, should have let the moment pass, but instead I found myself caught in the space between us. The faint warmth of her hand still lingered on my skin, the scent of her perfume stronger now that she stood so close. The room seemed smaller, the silence heavier. I wanted to tell her I didn't mind staying late, that I liked being here with her, even if we said nothing at all. But those words felt too revealing, too dangerous. So I just sat there, looking up at her, my heart thudding harder than it should for such an ordinary moment. And in her eyes, for just a flicker of a second, I thought I saw it. The same awareness, the same question, the same unspoken tension that had been building between us since the clock first struck 9. Her command had been simple. Close that file. But the truth was there was something else opening in the silence between us. Something neither of us had dared to name. For a moment, I just stared at her, the file still tucked under her arm. She had taken it from me as though it were nothing, just another late-night habit of hers. Tidying up, keeping order, making sure things ended the way she wanted them to. That was her strength, after all. She controlled every room she stepped into, every meeting, every deal, every late night in this office. But standing so close, her perfume brushing against me, the faintest curve of fatigue softening her lips, I saw something else. A trace of vulnerability she didn't let anyone else glimpse. And that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't hide anymore. I don't know why I said it. Maybe the silence was too heavy. Maybe the look in her eyes pulled something reckless out of me. Maybe I was tired of pretending that sitting across from her every night didn't stir something I couldn't put back in a box. She had said, firmly, "Close that file." And before I could think better of it, the words slipped out. "And open yourself to me." The sentence seemed to hang in the air, louder than it should have been. My voice wasn't sharp, not mocking, more of a murmur, edged with sincerity that I couldn't disguise. Her eyes widened just slightly. For the first time since I'd known her, she froze. It was as if my words had cracked through the polished shell she wore every day. Then she laughed. Not the full, confident laugh she used in boardrooms, but something smaller, unsteady. It was the kind of laugh people use when they don't know what else to do. Her hand adjusted the file against her chest, as though she needed something to hold on to. "That's bold," she said, shaking her head lightly. She tried to brush it off, but the silence after her words betrayed her. I smiled faintly, though my pulse was racing. "Maybe," I said, keeping my voice soft. "But it's the truth." She looked at me, then really looked, as though searching for a hint of sarcasm, some way to dismiss what I had just said as a joke. But I didn't offer her that escape. I just held her gaze, steady and quiet. Her lips parted as if she wanted to reply, but nothing came. Instead, her eyes flicked away to the city lights shimmering beyond the glass walls, to the desk where she had left her pen, anywhere but me. And yet, her fingers trembled just slightly where they clutched the file. The room felt charged now, the hum of the fluorescent lights almost drowned out by the rhythm of my heartbeat in my ears. Nothing had happened. No lines had been crossed. But the space between us was no longer the same. She finally whispered, almost to herself, "You shouldn't say things like that." But her voice lacked conviction. It wasn't a reprimand. It was something softer, like a warning she wanted me to ignore. And I realized then, my words had reached her. Her warning lingered in the air, soft, uncertain, as though even she didn't fully believe the words she had spoken. "You shouldn't say things like that." It should have ended there. I should have apologized, laughed it off, returned to my desk, and pretended that nothing had happened. That's what a wiser man would have done. That's what she expected me to do. But I didn't. I stayed in that silence, watching her, and something subtle shifted between us. For once, she wasn't in complete control. The usual steady composure that made her untouchable had cracked just slightly, and through it, I glimpsed the woman beneath the title, beneath the authority. She leaned back against the edge of my desk, crossing her arms, the file still clutched loosely in one hand. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in study, like she was trying to figure out who I was in this moment, this younger man who had dared to speak to her in a way no one else ever had. "You're too forward," she said finally. Her voice was calm, but it lacked its usual certainty. "Or maybe just honest," I replied. Her brow arched. She wasn't used to being challenged, not like this. Every day, she was the one setting the pace, dictating the flow, making others bend to her. Yet here I was, not bending, not backing down, but holding steady. And she didn't walk away. The air thickened between us. The quiet office felt suddenly smaller, as though the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. She tapped the folder lightly against her arm, her heels making a soft rhythm against the floor as she shifted her weight. A gesture meant to remind herself of authority, but the flicker in her eyes betrayed something else: curiosity. I leaned back in my chair, not defiant but calm, letting the silence stretch. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling, that sense that we had both stepped off a familiar path into uncharted ground. "You don't understand what you're asking," she murmured, almost to herself. "Then explain it to me," I said, softer now, my tone careful, respectful. Her gaze snapped to mine, sharp again, as though trying to re-establish the boundaries I had blurred. But I saw it, the hesitation before she answered, the way her lips parted and closed, as though the words she wanted to speak were fighting the ones she was supposed to say. For years, people had probably obeyed her without question. But I wasn't obeying. I wasn't pushing either. I was just there, steady, unshaken, giving her the one thing she never allowed herself: space to falter. And in that moment, the power she always held over me seemed to tilt ever so slightly. Because for the first time, she wasn't simply my boss. She was a woman, tired, strong, vulnerable, and standing much closer than she needed to be. And I could feel it, the beginning of something neither of us could quite name, but both of us could no longer ignore. The room felt charged, as though the very air between us had shifted. She was still standing at my desk, the file pressed against her arm like a shield, but her eyes had softened. The firmness, the authority she usually carried like a second skin, was still there, but it wasn't impenetrable anymore. I didn't speak. For once, silence felt like the bravest thing I could offer her. So I simply watched her, giving her the space to decide whether to retreat back behind her walls or let the moment unfold. Her lips parted as if to dismiss me, but instead of the polished reprimand I expected, what slipped out was quieter, rawer. "You have no idea how exhausting it is," she whispered. The words startled me, not in their content, but in their honesty. She wasn't talking about work. Not really. Her voice trembled faintly, and for the first time I heard something beneath her strength: weariness. The kind that doesn't come from hours of paperwork, but from years of holding everything together when no one else would. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the desk. My tone softened to match hers. "Then tell me." Her eyes flicked up to mine, sharp for just a moment, as though she was gauging whether I was mocking her. But I wasn't. My voice carried no edge, only sincerity. She exhaled, and the sound carried more weight than words. Setting the file down, she ran a hand over her hair, her shoulders loosening as though she had been carrying a burden too long. "Everyone looks at me like I have all the answers," she said. "Like I can't break, can't hesitate, can't let anyone see me falter." She shook her head. "It's easier to play the role than to explain why I can't keep it up." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd always seen her as untouchable, a figure of authority who never cracked under pressure. But here she was, her voice carrying a fragility that didn't match the image she projected to the world. Without thinking, my hand shifted slightly across the desk. Not touching hers, not quite, but close enough that the warmth of her skin brushed against mine in the stillness. I didn't want to startle her. I just wanted her to know I was there, present, listening. She didn't pull away. Instead, she looked down at that small space between our hands, then back at me. For a moment, her eyes glistened in the lamplight, the tiniest sheen of emotion threatening to show. "You're too young to understand," she said, though her voice cracked halfway through. "Maybe," I admitted softly, "but that doesn't mean I can't try." Her jaw tightened, but not in anger, in restraint. She was holding back, caught between the role she was supposed to play and the quiet pull she clearly felt in this moment. And in her voice, in that tiny fracture that slipped through her composure, I knew she had revealed more of herself to me than she had to anyone in a long time. The clock on the wall ticked toward 11:30, its steady rhythm louder than it should have been in the stillness of the office. Outside, the city lights shimmered like 1,000 silent witnesses, but in here, there was only her and me and the narrowing space between us. Her last words still hung in the air. "You're too young to understand." Maybe she was right, but the tremor in her voice, the vulnerability she hadn't meant to show, told me something else. She wanted to be understood, even if she couldn't admit it. She was standing close to my desk, one hand resting lightly on the edge. The file she had been holding lay forgotten now, a silent casualty of our conversation. Her fingers brushed the wood unconsciously, as though she needed something solid to anchor herself. I leaned forward slightly, not enough to push her away, but enough to close the distance in spirit, if not in touch. My voice was quiet, steady. "You don't have to explain everything. You don't have to be perfect for me." Her breath caught. I saw it in the rise of her chest, in the slight widening of her eyes. She tried to mask it, straightening her shoulders, but the reaction was already there. For a long moment, she said nothing. She just looked at me, studied me, the way she might study a difficult contract or an unsolvable problem. But her gaze wasn't cold. It was searching, almost vulnerable. Then it happened. Her hand, still resting on the edge of the desk, shifted. Slowly, tentatively, her fingers moved closer to mine. Not enough to touch, but enough that I felt the heat radiating from her skin. The air grew heavy, charged, as though the entire office had stopped breathing. The hum of the lights above seemed distant, irrelevant. All I could hear was the quiet rhythm of her breath, and my own heart pounding too hard for such stillness. I didn't reach out, not fully. Instead, I let the back of my hand graze hers. A feather-light contact, almost accidental. But when she didn't move, didn't recoil, I knew it wasn't an accident anymore. Her fingers twitched slightly, brushing mine. It was nothing, really, barely even touch. But in that small connection was everything we hadn't said, everything we had tried to hide. Her lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. Instead, her gaze lifted to meet mine, steady now, unflinching. It wasn't her boss's stare, the one she wore like armor every day. It was hers, unguarded, open, raw. We stayed like that, caught in the stillness, our hands almost entwined, but not quite, our eyes locked in a silent conversation that carried more weight than any words could. And in that moment, with the city glowing beyond a glass and the clock ticking down to midnight, I understood something with absolute clarity. She didn't want to step back. Not tonight. The clock struck midnight with a quiet chime, a sound that felt too fragile for the weight of what hung in the air. Her hand was still near mine, close enough that I could feel the warmth, close enough that I knew if I shifted even slightly, our fingers would be locked together. But I didn't move. Neither of us did. It wasn't hesitation, it was reverence. She exhaled, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You're impossible," she whispered. The words should have been a reprimand, something sharp to cut through the moment and remind us of boundaries. But instead, Her voice carried softness, almost fondness, like she was secretly glad I had crossed the line she had drawn for herself. I let a small smile rise to my lips, my voice low and steady. "Then let me be impossible for you." Her eyes searched mine, lingering as though trying to decide whether I meant it, whether I understood what I was offering. And maybe I didn't. Not fully. I wasn't naive enough to believe I could unravel all the complexities of her life with a few reckless words. But I did know this. I wanted to be there, to stand with her, to see the person behind the boss, even if only in these quiet, fleeting moments. For a long while, she said nothing. The silence was filled with the hum of the lights, the faint whoosh of the city's night air pressing against the glass windows, and the steady rhythm of her breath. Her eyes softened, and in that softness was something unspoken, something tender and fragile she had been holding back for far too long. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned her hand over on the desk. Her palm faced upward, an unspoken invitation. I moved carefully, gently, and set my hand in hers. Our fingers intertwined. Not forceful, not rushed, just steady and sure. Her skin was warm against mine, and the simple act of holding her hand felt more intimate than anything else could have been. Her thumb brushed lightly over the back of my hand, a small, unconscious gesture that said more than words could. She didn't look away. She didn't retreat. Instead, she let the moment be what it was. Two people meeting in a space neither of them had expected to share. After a pause, she smiled again, this time with more certainty. "We can't rush this." Her voice was still quiet, but it carried strength. "I don't want to rush," I replied. "I just want to be here, with you." Her shoulders relaxed, as if those words had lifted something she'd been carrying. She gave my hand one last squeeze before gently letting go, standing straighter, her professional mask slipping back into place, but not completely. There was warmth now, a flicker in her eyes that hadn't been there before. As she gathered her things, she whispered, "Good night." I watched her walk toward the door, her steps unhurried, graceful as always. Before leaving, she glanced back once, meeting my eyes with a look that held promise. And as the office lights dimmed around me, I knew this wasn't an ending. It was the quiet beginning of something neither of us could deny anymore.